All right, coach. We're good. We're good. We got it now. That gave you a second. Got to get the screen where you wanted it to be at. We're gonna start right into it. We're going till 10:40, 10:45 ish. We're through. Coach Sewell's got defense, and Coach, take it, run. Excited to see you, and excited to have you out here today, giving us some good clinic info. Thanks.
Sorry, Coach. I had to switch sides of my room. I had a lot of stuff going on in the background. Good morning. I'm Anton Sewell, defensive coordinator here at Bowie State. Want to thank you all for giving us the opportunity to be a part of this clinic this morning. I'm going to go ahead and get right into it, share my screen. So what I'm going to talk about today is the importance of definitions and terms in your defense. So when Coach Wilson came to us with this idea, and one of the things he talked about is kind of think of some things that we feel as though guys have issues with when they're making that transition from high school to college. So this was one of the biggest things that I thought about. We've had a few scenarios where we've had some kids who have been really good, really talented kids, but have struggled in terms of making that transition just because when you get to the college level, the mental part of the game, especially for us defensively, is very big. And a lot of times it takes those guys a while to get caught up just because it's almost like learning a foreign language to some of them. All right, so communication is key. We actually have a master's degree program at our university for organizational communication. So it just kind of gives you an idea of how important communication is within any organization, but specifically a football team and for us defensively. In order to be effective defensively, you and your players, must all be able to speak the same language. So for us, a lot of what we do is, tendency based. So we do a lot of communicating throughout the week in practice and definitely in games. And it makes it a lot easier for us to be able to effectively communicate as coaches as well as players when we're all speaking the same language. We actually had a situation where Coach Williams and I were talking a lot during the game, and it wasn't until that Sunday at the meeting where we finally figured out what each other was saying. That was his first year with us, so it kind of gave me a light bulb went off in my head as far as me needing to do a better job as a coordinator, just making sure that everybody understands and is using the same terminology that we're using defensively. What needs to be communicated? Formations. We are a big tendency-based defense. So when you take a look at our scouting report or come to one of our practices, we talk a lot about formations. Talk a lot about what teams like to do out of specific formations. So it's important that guys understand how we call our formations. Whereas though you may be coming from a place where they call a formation something, but you need to make sure that for you guys, all of your players understand what you call your formations. Strength. Strength is a big thing for us because it controls how we align defensively. We get a lot of guys, especially young guys, who, when we ask them about the strength, they're going to look at where the most people are. So if there's a tight end on one side and there's two receivers on the other side, they'll tell, they're going to identify the strength to the side where the most people are. Where for us, we identify the strength as where the tight end is. So whatever you use to identify your strength, make sure that your players understand that. You have to communicate alignments. Some people, when you get receivers lined up tight to each other, some people will call it a buddy split. Some people just call it tight split. Whatever the case is, whatever you call it, make sure your players understand that, so that now when you're communicating with them and when they're communicating with each other on the field, there's no confusion. You have to be able to communicate defensive adjustments, checks, front changes, and coverage adjustments. So everybody must understand. Some people, and I know cloud coverage is somewhat of a universal terminology, but we actually call cloud coverage something different. So I'm not going to get into our specific terminology, but I'll use some of our stuff as examples. So one of the things that we do in terms of being able to communicate effectively is within meetings. we'll have guys that and this is obvious though, if you have the opportunity to meet with your players, but even in practice, make sure guys are talking. Have situations where coaches aren't the only voices that are being heard, and the players are standing up and speaking so that what they're saying. One thing that young guys aren't going to do, especially at the age you guys are getting them, they're not going to tell you when they don't understand things. They're not going to tell you when they're, when they're confused about something, because to them, they're going to feel embarrassed if they speak up and say, "Coach, I don't understand what you mean when you say X, Y, and Z. Coach, I don't understand what this term means." Even though probably more than half of the people in the room don't understand it, they're going to feel as though if they're the one that speaks out, then they're singled out, and they're going to feel some type of shame. So make sure that you allow those guys to speak and talk through what they know. That way, what needs to be corrected, and when it comes time to communicate with those guys within the game and make adjustments, that you guys are going to be able to speak the same language. All right. No translators on the field. So again, everyone must speak the same language. There cannot be I don't know what you mean on the field. If whoever makes your calls for you, whether it's your linebackers, whether it's your safeties, when they make a call, and they say, "Hey, check green, check green, check green," everybody has to know what that means. Nobody can be confused as to what that means, because what will happen is the person that's confused now becomes hesitant. And if you're hesitant defensively, you're probably going to give up a big play for the offense. All right. Emphasize that everyone uses the same terms, even if you have multiple terms that mean the same thing. For example, spill or wrong arm or wrong shoulder. You may use spill, whereas though someone else may be coming from somewhere where they were taught wrong arm. One of the things that we do, they both mean the same thing. They both mean that we're attacking the block on the inside shoulder and making the ball bounce outside. But it's important that when you're talking to your guys, they understand the language that you speak. All right, they understand that they understand the language. That you speak. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So that's important also, because when you're in the game, I know for us defensively, whether we make a team do a 3 and out or whether a team scores a touchdown, when we come to the sideline, the very first thing we're going to do, we're going to sit down and we're going to debrief about what just happened on the field. Now, as Coach Reed explained and Coach Reddick explained, our offense is up tempo. So we may come and sit down, and we may look up 2 plays later, our offense has scored a touchdown. So we don't have time to sit on the sideline and try to figure out what each other are saying. We have to be able to talk and use our terminology and be able to effectively communicate and communicate quickly. All right. Also, when your players understand your terms, when your players understand the language that you're speaking, now when they come to the sideline, a lot of times they're going to talk to you. All right, they're going to talk to you. If I have a 3-year-old son. I know sometimes he gets frustrated with me because I don't understand what he's saying all the time. So I know for older guys, and I know even as a player myself, when I would try to communicate with a coach and he didn't understand what I was saying, a lot of times coaches get frustrated when the kid isn't saying something clearly to them, and now the kid gets frustrated because he just wants a solution. He doesn't really care about anything else. He wants a solution because he doesn't want to go out there and not have success because, you weren't able to provide him with a solution. So again, making sure that everyone is speaking the same language is very, very big. All right. Let the players be involved. All right. Don't be that guy where as though, hey, this is what I call it, so that's what it's going to be called. If you're a coach, and going back to that same example, if you've been saying spill all your life and 8 out of your 11 defensive players have been saying wrong arm, you probably need to call it wrong arm. Just being honest, because the more interested those guys are and the more invested they are, the easier it will be for them to recall it. All right. But be careful to censor the calls, especially for my high school guys, and if any college guys are on here. They'll sometimes when I give them permission to come up with some calls, I have to say, "Hey man, we're not calling it that," or we're not using that signal on the field. I'm not gonna have the university president see me doing certain signals on the sideline because it's something you guys came up with. But one of the things we did, like one of the examples that we did is, we'll use athletes, we'll use rappers, we'll use famous, just famous people in general. At one point, the guys were using former players on the team to describe some of the calls. So, for example, if a kid wore cover 1 for us that may have been a senior when a lot of those guys were freshmen, then our call for cover 1 would be that person's name. So it was something that for them, it was easy to remember. It avoided them having to say the number on the field when we were making a check. Or even if if you say Deuce or Trey, most people know that's 2 or 3. But if you hear, hey, Kenny, most people don't know that Kenny is the safety that wore number 2 5 years ago. So it was one of those things where those guys, when as they became more involved, it became a lot easier for them to remember. Because again, it was their call. It was putting the responsibility back on them. It wasn't, with coach, it's hard to remember that it was, hey, you guys came up with this call. We had a meeting. Y'all agreed this was the best call for the situation. So again, make sure those guys are involved. All right. Sorry. Nope. Should be one more. All right. So these are some general defensive or football terms that I think is important to start teaching kids from even from the youth league level defensively. Field and boundary. Understanding the field is obviously the wide side of the field. The boundary is to the short side of the field. That's very important in little league and high school because you guys' hash marks are so wide that it's important to note that, hey, if formation is into the boundary or teams put their best receiver into the boundary, why are they doing those things? So that when you're communicating with your guys, now you don't have to say the short side of the field or the wide side of the field. Again, it may seem minute, but again, when you're talking about seconds being the difference between you being able to effectively communicate with somebody and get that kid to understand, then shorten it down to one word makes a big deal. Top and bottom of numbers. Again, just little things when you talk about alignment for receivers. Hey, what is that guy going to do when he's at the top of the numbers versus the bottom of the numbers? If you may be saying that, and a kid simply doesn't understand. So now you're doing a good job in your mind teaching it, and you're trying to figure out, hey, this guy is at the bottom of the numbers, or he's outside the numbers, or the top of the numbers, or whatever the case may be. And why is this kid still aligning opposite of where I told him to align? Because he doesn't understand what you're saying, coach. All right. Pull, trap. Again, just offensive line movements that is important that linebackers and D-line understand what those things mean. Squeeze can be a term that's used on the from the first level to the third level. Squeeze can be a defensive lineman stepping down and squeezing when that tackle goes down. Squeeze can be a DB squeezing that receiver to the sideline when the ball is in the air. All right. Shuffle. Again, shuffle can be a D-line shuffling down on the zone read. Shuffle can be a defensive back shuffling. When he's playing some type of press technique. Shuffle can be a linebacker shuffling when he's reading run or getting over the top on the zone or something. All right. Spill versus box. All right. Again, and box and force can kind of be similar. Even though we more so use force for the outside, we use box inside and outside. Spill is when I'm taking on a blocker, forcing it outside. Box for us is when I'm taking on a blocker, forcing it back inside to my help. Force or contain, again, it's normally that's one that I think is big because anytime you play a defense where you have other people involved in the run force besides just your defensive lineman, it's important that everybody understands what a force player is and what a force player's responsibility is. Because if you're a cover 2 team, your corners may be your force players. If you're a quarters team, your safeties may be either your primary or secondary force players. When you're bringing a blitz, it's important that those guys understand that they are now the force players in your defense. Peel is either when you have a rusher or a blitzer that has to now pick up a running back that's going out into a pass route to his side. Pressure rush for us is when a guy doesn't have a blitz called per se, but he's responsible for a running back in man coverage, and now he's rushing to that guy. So as opposed to sitting back and waiting for him, if you guys watched any of the games yesterday, Tampa Bay did a really good job of running some screens because the Saints linebackers were sitting back as opposed to rushing to their guy when he appeared to show as a part of the pass protection. All right, and then some coverage terms that again I think are kind of universal. Flat. Some people call it flats. Some people call it flats. Deep half. Deep third, obviously deep half, you're responsible for one half of the field. On the deep end, deep third is when you kind of cutting the field in three, with your three deep defenders. China or smash when you get any type of short route, whether it be in, whether it be stop route, whether it be slant, whether it be speed out, and then you're getting a vertical by number two. All right. Leverage is key. Leverage is key on all levels of the defense. You have to leverage the football to where your help is. If you're a guy that's playing and you're a cornerback and the guy is running down the sideline, you want to leverage the football to the sideline. All right. If you're a guy that's inside the numbers but you're outside the hash, you probably want to leverage the ball outside to force it back in. That's really based on your defense and what type of calls you have. But it's important that you teach those guys what their leverage is based in every single call. All right, that's important again because if we're talking about a cover three versus a cover two for a safety or a corner, their leverage in terms of run fit may be completely different than it is, in one coverage than the other. Vice is anytime you have two guys converging on the ball, you want those guys coming at different sides of the ball carrier. All right, you don't want to have two guys converging on the ball. Both those guys go inside. That guy breaks that one tackle and gets outside, and there's nobody there. All right, we talked about cloud coverage, where whereas though a lot of times people use cloud coverage when you have a corner who's responsible for a flat, whether it be a 3 deep or a 2 deep. He's a flat player to his side. Buzz when you have someone that's that's aligned inside, that's going to shoot straight to the flats. He's not really taking any read or anything like that. And the last one will be sink. And sink can be for your linebackers or your defensive backs when they're dropping deeper into a coverage zone behind where their original alignment was. All right. So I hope I didn't go too fast. I was kind of trying to make up for the time deficit that our offensive coaches put us in. This is something that we're kind of used to at Bowie, having to make up for those guys, being as though we have an offensive head coach. We kind of get the short end of the stick schedule wise all the time. So we're gonna be efficient and effective either way.
All right, Coach. Coach Williams, you're up. Coach Sewell, you have been cracking up. That was great. So, Coach Williams, you're ready to rock and roll. Feel free to share your screen and get right into it.
All right. Can you guys see my screen? I'm currently sharing it now. No screen share. You got my screen? Can't see presentation.
We did, and now we don't.
Okay, try it again. How about now?
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's get through this for the sake of time. Good morning, everybody. My name is Avery Williams. I'm the defensive line coach here at Bowie State University. My topic of discussion is going to be disrupting the run game and how to properly run fit. So the biggest key is that you want to understand that repetition is going to be your key to success. When you're implementing your game plans for the week or just simply doing an install, you want to rep that as much as possible, doing your individual drills, your group drills, and that, as well as when you come to getting into team. Some of the things that I've used in the past, as related to the process of instruction, I always like to introduce the players to the skill first, basically break it down, explain it to them. As you talk about the fundamentals and the techniques that you're going to be implementing based, again, on the scheme and the game plan. After going through it, the skills, next we want to start drilling those skills, right? Actually practicing those movements or the movements that you're going to need to be successful as you work on your approach angles. And then lastly, putting that skill and drill session into action, actually going ahead and in your group sessions, actually executing everything as you're going against an actual offense. So the 4 A's, I really feel like this is super important as it relates to having a successful defense, as well as, properly run fitting. First of all, you have to know what the alignments are. Next, you want to know and have a great understanding what each player's assignment is. We always want to have the ability to attack and using the correct approach angles. And then lastly, the ability to read or analyze each play. On the high school level, as well as youth league, you can never start too early to teach the defensive technique alignments. Obviously, this is going to be super important as it relates to kids understanding the techniques when they are supposed to line based on the front call in the scheme. And this is also important for your linebackers and secondary players. They understand each of these defensive techniques, because there may be a situation in which they end up in the box. So again, it's very important that all players understand and know each alignment based on that front call. All defensive players, again, need to know the proper technique alignments, the proper techniques that they're going to use based on the block that they receive, as well as it relates to their individual fits. The next important piece is being able to identify the gaps. You'll be surprised that on the high school level, after coaching high school ball for about 15 years, me having guys come into the program, which they've never been introduced to, what an A gap was, what a B gap was, what the C gap is, what the alley is. So you want to drill this as much as possible. I'd suggest actually, performing some written tests occasionally just to quiz those guys. And then after, determining the correct alignments based on the calls, everybody has to process that information and then react appropriately. It's also important that each player understand their pass rush lane responsibilities. I know we're talking about run fits, but in this instance where you perhaps may have a blitz on, it's very important that those guys understand where they fit in each gap, along with the defensive lineman or the defensive front. After going through that process, the way that I look at it is up front for front four, we want to focus on our alignments, our assignments, and then we attack before we analyze. However, for secondary players, I've always taught, you align, focus on your assignment. We want to analyze and then attack as we come downhill. Before, again, the front, we want to force the action up front. So we want to attack before we start analyzing or while we're analyzing, as opposed to just simply standing up at the line of scrimmage and titty bopping with offensive line. And so when it comes to the analysis piece, I suggest, again, running as many read drills as you possibly can in your Indy, whether that is the front four, the middle of the defense players, or the secondary players, training their eyes. The biggest key for you having success in the run game is disciplined eye play from all of the players that are involved. So what is a run fit, and who's actually involved? So I figured the best way to explain it is a run fit is where each defensive player fits into a defensive gap across the front, offensive front. But more importantly, all 11 defensive players have a fit, and we need to understand that they also have a fit while they are in pursuit. And keep in mind, that fit is super important as it relates to when gaps change or expand, actually the approach angle going inside of that gap. So it may be a B gap, but the fit may be on the inside of that B gap as opposed to the outside of that B gap. All of this is relative, fellas. In order for this to work, you have to have total buy-in and eliminate that guy that wants to be the hero. All it takes is one guy with the improper fit for you to give up a big play in the run game. So with that said, the players have to trust each other. And that trust also is needed in instances, say, when, for example, an assignment is missed and another player has to cover for another. So trust is huge. So, doing as many team building activities as you possibly can to kind of reinforce those ideas in terms of we trust each other. I trust that you're going to do your job. Have all players believing in doing the job as opposed to, again, having one or two players that want to perhaps be a hero, jump outside of a gap, and then we give up a big play. So why coach run fits? Teaching run fits versus gap responsibility. This is a growing debate in terms of, how you should instruct it. Should you just teach the run fits or should you teach the responsibilities? Personally, I believe that you need to teach the responsibilities as it relates to the technique alignments, the gaps, etc., and then progress to talking about the fits in terms of how they fit into that gap, whether that's going to be an inside entry point or outside entry point. As I've stated several times, you can never do too much of training their eyes. Do as many read drills as you possibly can, walkthroughs, put them on the board during these times on the Zoom calls. Allow those guys perhaps post a picture of an offensive play and have guys talk through it. And along with those reading drills, all right, we want to understand how we want to react to certain blocks. So block recognition is awfully important as it relates to triggering and guys getting off the ball and actually fitting into the correct areas. For example, you may want to set up certain techniques that you want to use versus certain block. For example, one technique that we use versus a down block is what we consider to be a hip technique, in which we would attach and shuffle down to compress those inside gaps from a defensive end perspective. And then next, again, also emphasize the entry points, as well as the hole placement. Hopefully you guys understand that I'm really emphasizing the hole placement is really the biggest key when it comes to fitting. Again, you may have a situation where you have a puller and things have been added to the strength or to the weak side of the offensive formation. All right, those entry points as relates to who's spilling or perhaps boxing, utilizing some of the key terminology that Coach Sewell used, their entry points. After you're doing this, and from a stationary standpoint, I suggest now let's start working towards training those eyes because gaps move. One of the biggest things, transitions for guys, teaching it from a stationary standpoint, especially with all of the zone blocking offensive schemes that we're seeing now. It's truly important that they understand that gaps move. All right, so they're not just going to be flying upfield as it relates to getting off and run into areas. They have to maintain their gap responsibility and it's super important that our players are not getting reached, which is causing some cutback lanes, which could, be very detrimental. So basically locating and filling based on the call. There are going to be some situations where you're going to have to gap exchange and replace. Hopefully I have a moment to just kind of go over a couple of slides to demonstrate that. And also understand that, on blitzes and stunts calls, all right, based on those offensive line pulls, everything is subject to change post-snap. So it's even more important that you're drilling these things throughout the course of the week. I feel like we do a really good job of preparing players based on film study. So as a coach, feel like it's your responsibility to prepare your players the best that you possibly can, so that they understand where their fit is based on a certain play, based on how you prepare each week. And then lastly, you want to understand how you want to box or spill. We sometimes use a splatter technique, which is very similar to a spill, in which when we have versus a split zone, that wide bluffing, we take a different approach angle as opposed to the angle that we take in terms of attacking the inside shoulder when we are spilling. We also want to understand certain situations. Say, if you're playing against a team that bootlegs a lot, perhaps putting in a couple of things in which we're not going to spill, but we're going to box it and come over the top from, say, a defensive end or force player perspective. Some of the variables that affect the defensive run fits and your entry points, obviously the offensive blocking scheme, the alignments, and the spacing of the splits. We played a team last year who came out with 2 3-foot splits up front, which obviously is going to change the approach angles when guys are triggering and getting off the ball up front. The pullers, a lot of pull action, obviously is used to add to the strength or the weak side of a formation. And so as a defense, we have to understand how we need to adjust, whether we want to attack the first puller, the second puller, whether or not we want to spill it, whether or not we want to box it. And these are all things that will be determined throughout the course of the week. The overall understanding of the defensive scheme and concepts also plays a significant role in how well each defensive player is able to properly fit. It's super important that all players understand the rules and the scenarios that might force a gaps change, and that's pre-snap or post-snap, which leads back to I heard Coach Reed state earlier, you can never start studying enough film. So I would implore you to, on the youth level as well as the high school level, to implement film study, weekly as a practice, to continue to start start training those eyes and continue developing the eye discipline. The front calls, the blitzes, the coverages, all of these things play a significant role in how we're going to properly fit, once the ball has been snapped. Again, we may have a stunt call on or blitz call on, which may cause an automatic gap exchange. For example, you may have a stunt call on in which you want your defensive end to slant it, it's lined up in a 5 technique to slant inside and take the B gap responsibility. But that automatically tells the inside linebacker to his side that he has to scrape and come over the top. What will make it work? Communication, pre and post snap, as well as Coach Sewell mentioned earlier throughout the course of the week. It's been a common thing. Communication. You can never communicate too much so that the players, and the entire staff is always on the same page. And then the last piece, I feel like it's very important that we don't neglect the fact that pursuit is also important as it relates to the run fits, due to the fact that you do have a fit when you're pursuing the ball as well. Right here, really quickly, I'm going to try to wind this up so that I can give Coach Jackson an opportunity to present. Just real quick on your screen, you see just, versus and very simple outside zone play. We notice here backside, actually strong. We call this defensively strong left based on the wise placement. That's how we usually do it. We see that we have a force player in terms of our Sam. We have a 7 technique here, who's responsible for the C gap. All right. We have a Mike Backer aligned here in a 30 technique, who is going to be responsible for this B gap. Our shade or nose techniques here, he's responsible for the A. All right. And this is pretty simple as I go through this, based on direct flow. You can easily sort out, where everybody should fit. Here we have a change. We have a puller. All right, we have a guard that's pulling, which means now we have an extra gap being added to the weak side of this formation. With that stated, all right, anytime coaching our linebackers, all right, we get blocked down, kick out, we want to automatically trigger that. All right, which means that backer now has the responsibility to flow over the top and work outside. We also have a force player coming down as it relates to our safety. So we see that right here, we're pretty good. Looking right here, this offensive tackle is giving us a down block. Again, one of the ways that we react to that is by using our hip technique, all right, to reduce the B gap and help out that linebacker that's blitzing, all right. So, like I said, I'll speed through this, fairly quickly. I would suggest, drawing up some plays. All right, as you can see here, we see now that we have 2 pullers in this situation, which means now right? Our fits are going to change based on the flow, the offensive flow, whether that be a direct flow, fast flow, or slow flow. All right, and it takes some time. Go in the huddle, again, look at it, see who is in a position based on alignment to do which job the best. And these are some things that you kind of work through, as your game plan. We want to go over this one real quick and then I'll wrap it up. So just taking a look at this. All right. We're looking at pretty much a pro set offensively. Up front, we're in just a basic over front. Right? Identify the gaps and the responsibilities. Again, this is something that you process all week. All right? Everybody should know what their responsibility is based on each gap and the technique that they're aligned in. Up front, pretty much the alignment that you have, that's going to be your gap responsibility. And linebackers will use, their eyes and their eye discipline to understand their fit. So we notice here that we have Y motion, all right, which is changing things. If you notice back here, we have a safety who is making that pull call, that motion call to alert the inside backers that they might have a change in responsibilities so that they can communicate that with the defensive front. All right. So now once the ball has been snapped, they decided to bring the Y back to the strong side, a weak side rather. All right. Again, based on the defensive alignment techniques, we have a defensive end here in a 5 technique. He understands that he has to anchor down, all right, to prevent that B gap expansion. All right. Looking at it from just going across the board, our inside linebacker here is getting a down block kick out, which he's been taught to trigger. In just a minute, we're going to see how he effectively spills this play out to the defensive end. Backside, checking the backside A before scraping. All right, we have a defensive tackle in a 3 technique, taking care of his responsibility in the B gap, as well as our defensive end out here in a 5 technique, taking care of the contain and the gap expansion as relates to that B gap. All right, so as the play moves forward, we see that Y is coming across to try to kick the inside linebacker that's triggering, kick him outside so that the ball can be ran into that B gap. But if you're looking at this, all right, if you notice, when we're talking about run fits, this linebacker is doing an excellent job of fitting properly in terms of his approach angle, attacking the inside shoulder of the puller. Backside, we look pretty good in terms of our defensive end, our tackles. We also have our eyes right here in this backside A gap, which is a potential weakness, all right, based on the call. And we also have help here from our safety, who is there to catch the spill. All right. Again, we see now that our linebacker has done an outstanding job of spilling this play to his help. All right. He has help outside as it relates to the anchoring in, as well as the safety coming downhill. Now, it's also important to note that in certain situations, and based on the call, if the safety is based on the coverage call is not available, in certain situations, we have to communicate it, and we may have to box this actual pull or the ball back to the inside linebacker who's covering that inside A gap or that weak side A gap. But with just that being demonstrated really quickly, we see that spill technique caused everything to go laterally, in which we were able to rally and make an effective play. I have tons of other information, so if you're interested in it, please email me. I'll be happy to share this PowerPoint. But then, again, in an effort to allow others some time to speak, I'll wrap it up. Thanks for your time. My time is up.
All right. Coach Williams, awesome job. Coach Jackson, I'm not trying to snub you by any means. I would love to get an opportunity to have, maybe what we could do is get a chance to do it again, because I've got the next group that's lined in, ready to rock and roll, if you're okay with that. The big concept about teaching the drills and teaching the idea. I want to try and get Coach Wilson back in here real quick because I got a few questions for everybody as they're in. Coach Wilson, again, thank you for having your staff on. Thank you for having everybody that shared their PowerPoints. I've got your emails and the information together that I'm going to put onto the website with your permission, of course, and to get a chance to actually share that. If anybody's got any questions, I feel terrible. Coach Jackson, I'm making this a requirement. You got to come back, though. All right. Here's the deal. You got to come back, and you've got to be able to present, because Coach Williams started getting into the man, he got in there and started getting into the stuff. And that man, we could have carried that on for the rest of the day. I think I started getting comments. People are texting me like, "Ooh, good film. Yes, awesome. Let's do that." So yeah, man, as long as you're okay with it, I just want to say, for me to you guys, I really appreciate you guys being the first one to do this with us, and to have the opportunity. Everybody did an outstanding job and really did a great service for our community down here, for all the coaches that were turning in and watching. I could see, a lot of guys have been communicating, sending me texts, and it's great. I think this is going to be something that we could build upon without a doubt, because I think it's vital that people see, football fundamentals, what it takes, how much it really gets into. I mean, again, we're talking, that high level that you guys are at. It was outstanding for it to be communicated to us to let us know, hey, look, there's things at the fundamental stuff that we've got to get taught to our kids at all the way across, because if they're going to get a chance to actually move on, then they've got to be able to understand what it is that's going in. So I really appreciate everything that you went into today. And we're going to take a quick break as we bring in the next crew. We've got Hawk tackling that's coming up. So again, Coach, if you got anything that you want to say, we appreciate it.
Now, Coach, I appreciate you guys having us again. And anytime you guys need anything, please reach out. All of the PowerPoints, I will make sure I send them to you, Coach Riley, so you guys can post them to the site or whatever. But and I also add Coach Jackson's presentation as well.
Coach Jackson, I owe you